My stepmother hated one thing more than me: the single glass ornament my real mom left behind. It hung in our living room, a tiny bird holding on. When I finally asked for it at 19, she slapped me. But she never counted on my grandmother. That was her first mistake, and it would be her last. My name is Naomi Schneider. I grew up in Maplewood, Ohio, one of those small towns where the paint peels at the same slow rate as the seasons change. It's a place of porch swings and quiet judgment, where everyone knows which car belongs to which family. Mine was the house where the mother, Claire, had passed away too young. I was about 8 when the sickness finally took her. Of that last year. Most of my memories are blurred by a filter of beige hospital rooms and the smell of antiseptic, but the last Christmas we had, that one is sharp. It's the clearest thing I own. My father, Greg, had lifted me up to place the final ornament on the tree. It was my mother's favorite, a delicate glass hummingbird, its wings caught in mid-flight, its throat a swirl of iridescent blues and purples. She was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a quilt, her body thin, but her smile bright enough to light the room. "It catches the light, doesn't it, Nomi?" she'd whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "It reminds me that even when you're standing still, you can still be flying." After she was gone, the house fell silent. The silence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating, and then came the purge. My father, a man who worked with his hands at the machine shop, was useless in the face of grief. He couldn't touch it, fix it, or weld it shut, so he let other people pack it away. Aunts and cousins descended, their voices hushed, their hands efficient. They emptied her closets, boxed her books, donated her shoes. The house was stripped of her scent, her touch, her presence, in less than a week. Everything was going, until my grandmother, Evelyn Schneider, stepped in. She walked into the living room as they were wrapping the Christmas decorations. She picked up the glass hummingbird from its tissue paper bed. She didn't say a word to my father or the weeping aunts. She simply walked to the center of the living room, to the prominent wall between the 2 front windows, and hammered a small nail into the plaster. She hung the ornament there. "That," she said, her voice quiet but final, "stays." It was the only thing of Claire's left in the open, the single, fragile testament that she had ever lived in that house. My father didn't object. Greg Schneider was a man of few words, a man who preferred the predictable clang of metal on metal to the messy, unpredictable terrain of human emotion. He went back to work. He paid the bills. He sat at the head of the dinner table in silence. As the years passed, that hummingbird on the wall became just another part of the room to him. I think he stopped seeing it as my mother's. It was just a pretty decoration, something to dust around. He never spoke of her, and he never spoke of what the ornament meant. His avoidance was a different kind of purge, a slow, daily erasure. When I was around 11, maybe 12, Greg remarried. Her name was Lydia. Lydia was a woman who spoke in italics. Everything was just wonderful, or absolutely darling. She was immaculate, her blonde hair always in a perfect, smooth helmet, her floral dresses always pressed. She knew how to win over the neighbors, arriving with homemade pies and a smile that never faltered, but that smile never, not once, reached her eyes when she looked at me. To the town, she was a saint, the woman who had stepped in to raise a motherless child. To me, her eyes were cold, calculating, and constantly appraising. I was a problem to be managed, a piece of the old life that didn't fit her new decor. And the decor, you have to understand, was her first priority. Lydia moved her things in slowly, insidiously. It started with the curtains in the living room, Claire's light. Airy linen panels were replaced with heavy, dark floral drapes that blocked the afternoon sun. The watercolor paintings of the Ohio countryside my mother had loved were taken down, the nail holes spackled over. In their place, Lydia hung sterile, geometric prints and, eventually, framed photographs of herself. She brought in statues, little porcelain figurines of shepherdesses and dogs that cluttered every surface. The house began to smell like her, a cloying mix of potpourri and hairspray, with every new throw pillow, every new rug. Another trace of my mother was buried. Soon, the only thing left on the walls that hadn't been chosen by Lydia was the hummingbird. It hung there, defiant and fragile, a grain of sand caught in the gears of her perfect new machine. Then Tessa came. Tessa was Lydia's daughter from her first marriage. A few years younger than me, she was, in every way, Lydia's princess, while I was expected to be the big sister, the one who has to be understanding. Tessa was coddled. She got new clothes for the start of school. I was told my old ones were perfectly fine. She was praised for getting a B on a quiz. My straight A's were met with a non-committal, "That's nice, dear," from Lydia, before she turned the conversation back to Tessa. The dinner table became a performance stage. It was the place my invisibility was confirmed, night after night. "Tessa, darling, tell your father about the solo you got in the school play." Lydia would trill. "That's my girl," Greg would boom, his face lighting up in a way it never did for me. "We'll have to have the whole crew from the shop come see you." "And her costume," Lydia would jump in. "We found the most perfect shade of pink satin. It cost a pretty penny, but she deserves it." I would wait for a pause, a small gap in the waterfall of praise. "I got an A+ on my literature essay," I'd offer quietly, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "And I was thinking about my future. I really want to study interior design." Lydia would give a tight, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that's sweet. Naomi, drawing pretty pictures." She would then immediately turn back to my father. "Greg, speaking of the future, we need to discuss Tessa's college fund. I was looking at some excellent East Coast schools." My father wouldn't even look at me. He'd just nod, fork halfway to his mouth, already absorbed in the important, shimmering future of his new daughter. My dreams, my grades, my existence, they were a distraction, an inconvenient whisper from a life he was trying to forget. So the hummingbird became my only ally. It was the one thing in the house that saw me. It was my silent friend. Every night, before I went to my room, I would stand in the living room doorway and just look at it. The single lamp on the end table would catch the glass, and for a moment, that little bird would glitter. I'd imagine it was my mother, winking at me, telling me she was still there. It was the only proof I had that I wasn't a ghost in my own home. Lydia hated it. She hated it because it was my mother's, and she hated it because it was mine. She despised any mention of Claire. If I brought her up, even in passing, Lydia's smile would become a thin, sharp line. "Naomi, you have to learn to look forward," she'd say, her voice dripping with false pity. "You can't cling to the past forever. It's not healthy." One Saturday, I came downstairs to find her holding it. She had a dust rag in one hand and the ornament in the other, her fingers wrapped tight around the delicate glass. On the floor was a large, gaudy, gold-painted frame holding a brand-new, professionally taken portrait of Greg, Lydia, and Tessa. They were all smiling, wearing matching blue sweaters. "This old thing is just gathering dust, and the nail is an eyesore," she said, not looking at me. "I think this spot is much better for our new family photo." My breath caught. I couldn't speak. I just stared as she started to unhook it. "Put it back, Lydia." We both froze. My grandmother, Evelyn, was standing in the doorway, her purse still on her arm. She hadn't even knocked. Her voice was flat, not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Lydia's face flushed. She forced that bright, brittle smile. "Oh, Evelyn, you startled me. I was just doing a bit of rearranging. This spot is just perfect for—" "I said," Evelyn repeated, stepping into the room. "Put it back. That ornament belongs to Claire and Naomi. It was here before you were—" The air crackled. Lydia's smile vanished. She looked from Evelyn's steel-gray eyes to my father, who had just walked in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. Greg looked at his wife, then at his mother, and did what he always did. He looked away. Now, let's not make a fuss, he muttered, retreating toward the kitchen. Lydia, defeated by a will stronger than her own, practically threw the ornament back onto its hook. The glass bird swung wildly, spinning on its thread. She snatched up her new frame and stormed into the dining room. From that day on, Lydia never touched the hummingbird again. But she didn't have to. Her hatred for it simply transferred, doubling down on me. I was the ornament. I was the living, breathing, stubborn shadow of the woman she couldn't completely erase. I was the last piece of Claire left in her house, and she would spend every day trying to make me feel as small and as breakable as that piece of glass. My grandmother Evelyn lived at the other end of the street. In a small bungalow that always smelled of chamomile tea and baking butter, she became my sanctuary. A few times a week, I'd escape to her kitchen. She never pushed me to talk about Lydia. Instead, she'd tell me stories about my mother. She always dreamed of traveling, Evelyn said one afternoon, pouring me a cup of tea. She wanted to see the ocean. She said she felt like she had salt water in her blood. Even here in Ohio, she'd smile, looking out her window. She picked that hummingbird. You know, we were in an antique shop in Canton. She said it looked like it was made of captured light. I started drawing it. I had a cheap, spiral-bound sketchbook and a set of pencils I'd bought with babysitting money. I'd sit on my bed and sketch that bird from memory, over and over. I obsessed over the way the light should hit the glass, how to capture that iridescent purple, how one tiny object could hold so much meaning. I wasn't just drawing an ornament. I was drawing a feeling. The feeling of being safe. The feeling of belonging. It was in that sketchbook, drawing that bird, that I realized what I wanted to do. I didn't just want to design pretty rooms. I wanted to create spaces. Spaces that held people, that protected them. Spaces where they felt, even if they were all alone, that they belonged. Tonight, I'm lying in my bed, in the room that has felt less like mine every year. The door is cracked open, just enough. I can see the living room, dark except for the hallway light, and even in that dimness, I can see it. A single, tiny spark hanging on the wall, the last outpost of my mother, the last proof that I was, at one time, loved fiercely. If you only had one thing left to remember you were ever loved, you would understand why I couldn't let it go. Lydia's victory was not a hostile takeover. It was a quiet, insidious merger. It began at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night. I was at the far end, trying to finish a geometry assignment, pretending I couldn't hear. "Greg, honey," she started, her voice a careful blend of logic and affection. She had spreadsheets fanned out next to the casserole dish. "We're a modern family, but our finances are simply archaic. Your name on this account, my name on that one. It's messy. It's inefficient." My father, smelling of metal shavings and industrial soap from the shop, rubbed the grease lines in his palms. He hated paperwork. He hated confrontation even more. "It's always worked, Lyd." "It works, yes, but it doesn't thrive," she cooed. "For tax purposes, for planning Tessa's college fund, for our future, we need to consolidate everything in one place. One joint account, one credit card, one bill. It's just cleaner. It's what united families do." He sighed, a long, weary sound that meant he was already defeated. "I guess you know best. Lyd, you're better with the numbers." "I'll handle everything," she promised, sliding a stack of signature forms toward him. "You won't have to worry about a single thing." He signed his name, and just like that, the financial autonomy of the house my mother had helped buy, the legacy she might have left, was absorbed. Lydia became the head of the Schneider family account. She paid the bills. She allocated the funds. She saw every debit. With this new power, her reorganization of the house accelerated. Her next target was the hummingbird. "I've been meaning to do this for ages," she announced one Saturday, dragging the dining chair into the living room. "That little ornament is so high up, nobody can see it, and it's so vulnerable just hanging on that nail. I worry constantly that it will fall." She had purchased a tall, glass and brass curio cabinet, filling it with her own porcelain figurines. She pointed to the very top shelf, a narrow ledge near the ceiling, obscured by the cabinet's ornate wooden crown. "We'll put it right up there," she said brightly. "It'll be much safer behind glass, and it won't be all alone on that wall. It'll be part of the collection." "No," I said, my voice too quiet. I cleared my throat. "Please, don't. It's meant to be there. That's where Grandma Evelyn put it." Lydia turned, her smile tightening. "Naomi, that's sweet, but it's just a spot on the wall. This is safer. It's an antique. It needs to be protected." "It's not an antique," I insisted, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "It's my mother's. It's the only thing of hers left. Please, just leave it." She let out a short, pitying laugh, as if I were a toddler fighting over a broken toy. "Honey, we've discussed this attachment you have. It's not healthy. Besides," she said, her voice turning cold and flat, "in this house, everything is ours. It's not yours or mine. It is our family's, and our family is putting it somewhere safe." She climbed onto the chair. I watched, paralyzed, as her perfectly manicured fingers plucked the hummingbird from its nail. She placed it on that high, dark shelf, pushing it to the back. It was no longer catching the light. It was captured. It was no longer a memorial. It was clutter she had been forced to accommodate. The following month, the final shift happened. My room, the room I had grown up in, the room that still had the pencil marks on the doorframe measuring my height, was confiscated. "Tessa is becoming a young woman," Lydia announced at dinner. "She needs a proper space. That little guest room just isn't working for her. And your room, Naomi, gets the best afternoon light. It's perfect for her." Where do I go?" I asked, my stomach turning to ice. "We're fixing up the spare room at the end of the hall," she said, as if this were fantastic news. The spare room was a glorified closet. It was where my father had stored his old work trophies and where my mother had kept her sewing machine. It was half the size of my room, with one small window that faced the neighbor's garage. There was just enough space for a twin bed and a small dresser. I was moved. My childhood room was painted a bright, offensive shade of peach for Tessa. I was now, officially, a temporary guest. I tried to focus on my escape, school. I poured every ounce of my frustration into my art, my design sketches. I worked for weeks on a project for a statewide scholastic competition, an intricate architectural poster depicting a public library designed to feel like a forest. I won first place in my district. I walked home clutching the heavy certificate and a blue ribbon, the first real accomplishment that was entirely my own. I found Lydia and my father in the kitchen, laughing with Tessa over something on her phone. "I won," I said, holding out the certificate. "First place, for the architecture poster." Lydia glanced up, her smile fading. "Oh, that's nice, dear. A drawing prize." She immediately turned back to Tessa. "Now, honey, show your father the email about the cheer camp you got into." "It's not just a drawing prize," I pushed, desperation making my voice shake. "It's for architectural design. It's what I want to study. It's—" Lydia cut me off, her patience snapping. "Naomi, that's enough. We're very happy you have your little hobby, but honestly, you should be focusing on more practical things. Drawing pretty pictures won't pay the bills, and it certainly won't find you a good husband. You should be more like Tessa, focused on things that build a real future." I looked at my father. He was already reading Tessa's email, his face lit with pride. "That's my girl, Tess," he boomed. My certificate felt like a piece of garbage in my hand. The final erasure was attempted at a Sunday dinner. Grandma Evelyn was there, which always put Lydia on edge, forcing her to be more subtle. "This house is just suffocating in clutter," Lydia announced, passing the mashed potatoes. "I was in the attic looking for a vase, and it is just bursting with things nobody has used in decades. Old clothes, boxes of papers. It's a fire hazard." My father grunted. "It's just old stuff, lid." "It's junk, Greg," she insisted. "We need a fresh start. I'm thinking, This spring, we have a massive clear-out, rent a dumpster, sell what we can, just cleanse the space. I knew what she meant. The attic was where the rest of my mother was. The boxes of her clothes, her college textbooks, her photographs. Lydia wouldn't dare touch the hummingbird while Evelyn was watching, but she was going after the rest. She wanted to cleanse the house of Claire completely. Grandma Evelyn set her fork down very slowly. She didn't look at Lydia. She looked at me. It was a long, steady look, and it was filled with something I hadn't seen before. Calculation. She wasn't angry. She was processing. Her eyes seemed to say, "This is not your fight. This house is not your home. When you are ready, you will not need to save anything from this place." She said nothing, and the silence was more powerful than any argument. Lydia, unnerved, quickly changed the subject back to Tessa's grades. My life settled into a new, grim routine. I was the help. Lydia laminated a chore chart. Tessa's column was conspicuously blank, aside from focus on studies and maintain personal grooming. My column was a novel. I was responsible for all family laundry, all dinner dishes, vacuuming the entire house, and dusting Lydia's multiplying collection of porcelain trash. Tessa was developing herself. I was scrubbing toilets. I needed money, not for clothes, not for movies. I needed an escape fund. I started taking on small jobs around Maplewood, under the table. I used the hobby that Lydia despised. I painted a new, whimsical window sign for the local bakery. I designed a new menu board for the coffee shop. I helped the hardware store owner figure out a better layout for his paint display. $20 here, $50 there. I couldn't put it in the bank. Lydia had access to the joint account my father had set up for my allowance years ago. She would see the deposits and demand to know where the money came from. So, I hid it. I tucked the folded bills deep into the spines of my old hardcover textbooks and novels, the ones crammed into the tiny bookcase in my closet room. It was my secret, my way out. I had saved nearly $200 when Lydia found it. She must have been snooping. There is no other reason she would have been in my room, pulling books off my shelf. I came home from school and found her standing there, my copy of Jane Eyre split open in her hands, the cash fanned out on my bed. Her face was not angry. It was terrifyingly victorious. "I was just looking for some old books to donate," she lied smoothly, her eyes glittering. "And look what I found. Naomi's secret treasure. Where did you get this? Naomi? Did you steal it?" "What? No, I earned it. I painted signs for—" "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "You've been skimming it, haven't you? From the grocery money your father gives me? Taking a 5 here, a 10 there?" "No, I would never. That's my money." "We'll see what your father thinks about this," she said, snatching the bills. That night at dinner, she played the part of the betrayed, heartbroken mother. She placed the cash on the table between my father's plate and hers. "Greg," she said, her voice trembling, "I feel I have failed as a mother. I found this hidden in Naomi's room. She's been hiding money from us, stealing from the family." I looked at my father, my heart pounding so hard I thought I would be sick. "Dad, no, I earned it. I painted the sign at the diner. I helped the bookstore. You can ask them." My father looked at the money. He looked at Lydia's tear-streaked, devastated face. He looked at me, his eyes cold and exhausted. It was easier for him to believe her performance than my truth. Believing me would mean he'd have to do something. It would mean confronting the woman who managed his entire life. "Why would you hide it, Naomi?" he said, his voice low and disappointed. "We're a family. Families don't keep secrets from each other. You're lying, or you're hiding things. Either way, it's wrong. Give the money to Lydia. She'll put it in the household account, where it belongs." I was stunned silent. He wasn't my protector. He was her enabler. I was not a daughter. I was a line item that was out of balance. That night, I knew this was not my house. It was the Schneider house. But I was not a Schneider. Not to them. I was just a ghost, and they were tired of me haunting the hallways. The only things that kept me tethered to this place, The only things that proved I had ever existed at all were Grandma Evelyn down the street and that little glass bird, trapped and invisible, high on its shelf. Have you ever lived in a house where everything, the photos on the wall, the name on the bank account, the very rules of existence, was labeled the Schneider family? Except you? By 19, I was legally an adult, a fact that seemed to irritate Lydia more than it offered me any freedom. I was in my first year at the local community college, studying drafting and art history, still clinging to the dream of interior design. I was also taking small jobs, the same ones I'd hidden money for before, painting signs and rearranging shop displays for a few dollars. Lydia called this Naomi's expensive hobby. "You're just wasting your father's money on tuition," she'd say over dinner, loud enough for him to hear. "It's a fantasy. You're almost 20 years old and you are still playing with crayons." My father would just sigh, preoccupied with the rising cost of parts at the shop. My hobby was paying for my own books and supplies, but I never bothered to correct her. Silence was easier. My real education was happening at Grandma Evelyn's kitchen table. She never dismissed my work. One afternoon in early November, she presented me with a gift. It was not new. It was an old, beautiful sketchbook, bound in soft, worn leather, the pages thick and creamy, smelling faintly of cedar. "When people will not give you a place to stand," she said, her hand covering mine on the cover, "you have to draw your own." That sketchbook became my armor. It was where I designed the life I would have, the moment I could finally leave. Christmas preparations started early that year, or rather, Lydia's preparations did. She had decided the theme was Winter Palace. This involved an avalanche of new, shiny, impersonal decorations, silver and ice blue spheres, plastic snowflakes, and yards of glittering, scratchy ribbon. She bought a new, taller, artificial tree that smelled like a chemical fire. She draped thick garlands of fake pine and silver beads everywhere, including the wall where the hummingbird hung. By the time she was done, my mother's ornament was almost completely obscured, buried behind a gaudy plastic bow and a cluster of silver bells. It looked like it was in a cage. I watched her, this woman who had systematically painted over, packed away, and replaced every trace of my mother, and now she was burying the last shred of her memory under a pile of cheap tinsel. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. This was a deliberate, final erasure. My father was in the living room that evening, untangling strings of lights, humming distractedly. Lydia was in the kitchen with Tessa, laughing about some video. This was it. It was the only chance I'd have. I kept my voice low, casual. "Dad?" He grunted, focused on a stubborn bulb. "I was just thinking," I said, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. "I'll probably move out on my own after I finish my associate's degree next year. When I go, can I take Mom's hummingbird ornament with me?" He didn't even have time to answer. "Absolutely not." Lydia was standing in the doorway, a dish towel in her hand, her face a mask of cold fury. "That's not what I asked. Lydia," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I was asking my father." "It does not matter who you asked," she spat, stepping into the room. "The answer is no. That ornament is part of this house. It belongs to this family. You are not taking it anywhere." I stood up from the sofa. I was 19. I was tired. "It does not belong to this family," I said, and the knot in my stomach turned into steel. "It belonged to my mother, and it belongs to me. It is the only thing in this entire house that does. I am not asking for the house. I am not asking for your money. I am asking for the one, single thing my mother left me." Lydia's face went crimson. The audacity. After everything I have done for you, raising you when... I looked past her, straight at my father, who was now standing, holding the useless tangle of lights. "Dad, please." He looked trapped. He glanced at Lydia's furious face, then at mine. He ran a hand through his hair. "Naomi, Lydia, let's just... Do not ruin Christmas. It's just an ornament. Let's not fight. Do not ruin Christmas." It was his anthem, It was the phrase he used to abdicate responsibility, the white flag he waved every time he was required to be a father. He was not avoiding a fight. He was avoiding the truth that he had failed to protect me for a full decade. My father's weakness was the only permission Lydia needed. She saw he would not intervene. She turned on me, her voice rising to a shrill peak. "You ungrateful, selfish child," she hissed, stepping toward me. "You live under this roof, you eat my food, and you dare to disrespect me? To disrespect this new family?" "I am not disrespecting anyone," I said, backing away slightly. "I am just asking for what is mine." "Nothing in this house is yours," she screamed. "You are just a guest here, and you have overstayed your welcome." It happened fast. I tried to step around her, to get to the door. She grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my bicep. "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. Her rage was something physical now, something she could not control. "You will learn respect." She shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward, my hips slamming into the sharp corner of a wooden side cabinet. The pain was immediate and sharp. Before I could even catch my breath, her hand came up and she slapped me across the face. It was not a tap. It was a full, open-palmed strike that cracked across the room. The sound was deafening. My head snapped to the side. The room went silent for a split second, then filled with other sounds. The cheap, new silver ornaments on the nearby mantelpiece rattled. My ears rang, and on the wall, just above Lydia's head, the thick garland of fake pine shuddered from the force of her movement. The hummingbird, trapped behind its plastic bow, began to swing violently on its hook, back and forth, back and forth. I stood there, stunned, tasting copper. My cheek was on fire. I was 19 years old. I was an adult, and I had just been assaulted by my stepmother in my father's house. While he stood 3 feet away and did nothing, I realized, in that ringing silence, that my age did not matter. 8, 12, 19, to them, I would always be something to be managed, silenced, and if necessary, struck. "Get your hand off her." The voice was not loud. It was low, cold, and absolute. Lydia, whose hand was still raised as if to strike again, froze. My father, who had been a statue, flinched as if he had been slapped. Grandma Evelyn was standing in the entryway, her coat still on, her keys in her hand. She must have let herself in, as she always did. Her eyes were not on me. They were locked on Lydia's raised hand, and they were filled with a terrifying, quiet rage. Lydia dropped her arm, her face instantly shifting from rage to a panicked, defensive whine. "Evelyn, you do not understand. She was being disrespectful. She was trying to steal." Evelyn ignored her. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not rush to me. She simply walked past Lydia, her gaze fixed on the wall. She stepped between my father and the garish Christmas display. She reached up, pushed the plastic bow aside, and with a quick, decisive movement, unhooked the hummingbird ornament. She pulled it from the wall as if she were pulling an old rusted nail from a piece of wood. She cradled the glass bird in her palm and turned. She looked at Lydia, who was sputtering, and at my father, who looked sick. "From now on," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the smell of fake pine, "this no longer belongs in this house." She paused, then her eyes met mine. "And neither does Naomi." Lydia exploded. "You cannot do that. This is my house. You cannot just come in here and steal things. She is playing the victim. She has always been the victim." My father finally found his voice, a weak, pleading bleat. "Mom, please, it is Christmas. Let's just talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about, Greg," Evelyn said, her voice void of any warmth for her son. "You had 10 years to talk. You chose to be silent." I saw Tessa peeking from the hallway, her eyes wide. She was not looking at my red cheek. She was looking at Lydia, then at Evelyn, her face pale. She was calculating what this meant for her, for the peach-colored room, for her protected life. She saw her comfort zone cracking, and she retreated back into the shadows. Evelyn walked to me. She did not try to hug me or wipe the single tear that was now tracking through the stinging red mark on my face. She simply placed her free hand on my shoulder. It was firm, steady. "Let's go, daughter," she said. Daughter. She had not called me that in years. I looked at my father one last time. He stood frozen, a coward nailed to the floor of his own living room, surrounded by glittering decorations. He watched me go. Evelyn led me out the front door, down the walk, and into her old, reliable sedan. She did not look back. I did not look back. I sat in the passenger seat as she started the car. The heater clicked on, blowing warm air. My cheek was a blazing, hot map of Lydia's fingers. My hip ached where I had hit the cabinet, but my chest felt light. The suffocating weight that had lived there for a decade was gone. Grandma Evelyn drove, her eyes on the road. She held the glass hummingbird in her left hand, her knuckles white as she gripped it. I watched the way the passing streetlights caught the glass, making it glitter in her fist. This was the night I was struck out of my family, the night I was physically, finally, cast out. But as I sat there, safe in the quiet hum of my grandmother's car, I knew it was also the first night, in a very long time, that someone had truly stood up for me. We drove the 4 blocks to Grandma Evelyn's bungalow in silence. Her house was at the very end of our street, tucked behind a large, unruly oak tree. It was the complete opposite of the house I'd just left. Lydia's house was cold, curated, and smelled of artificial pine and tension. Evelyn's house smelled of a life well lived. It was a constant, comforting blend of steeped chamomile tea, old books, and the faint, sweet scent of butter cookies, even when she had not been baking. She unlocked the door and clicked on a small, amber-colored lamp. The living room was small, filled with furniture that was old but immaculate. "Go sit in the kitchen," she said, her voice gentle now. "The ice pack is in the freezer. Top shelf. Left side." I did as I was told. I sat at her small, Formica kitchen table, the one where I had done homework for years, and pressed the cold pack to my face. The sting was beginning to subside, replaced by a deep, pulsing ache. Evelyn came in, not with pity, but with purpose. She put the kettle on the stove and got 2 mugs down from a hook. She did not coddle me. She did not say, "Oh, you poor, poor child." She sat down opposite me, her hands clasped on the table, and looked at the red mark on my cheek. "Well," she said, her voice practical, "what chapter of your life story do you suppose this is?" It was such a strange, direct question. It was not, "Are you okay?" It was, "What comes next?" And that simple, forward-looking question undid me. The dam of 10 years broke. I told her everything. I told her about the dinners, the endless parade of praise for Tessa while I sat in silence. I told her about my grades being dismissed, my dreams being called a hobby. I told her about being moved to the tiny closet room. I told her about Lydia's relentless, quiet campaign to erase my mother, to paint over every memory. I told her about the money she found, and how my father believed her, not me, and finally my voice breaking. I told her about the slap, the ringing silence, and the look of complete indifference on my father's face. I spoke for a long time. Grandma Evelyn did not interrupt. She just listened, her eyes never leaving mine, her head giving a single, sharp nod now and then. She understood. She was not hearing excuses. She was gathering facts. The kettle whistled, and she got up, made us 2 cups of chamomile tea, set mine in front of me, and sat back down, waiting for me to finish. When I finally ran out of words, I just sat there, exhausted and empty. "I see," she said. That was all. She got up and retrieved the hummingbird ornament from her coat pocket. She carried it to the sink and, with a soft cloth, began to wipe away the dust and the residue of Lydia's tinsel. She was incredibly careful, her gnarled fingers treating the delicate glass with a reverence I had not seen in years. I watched, expecting her to find a nail, to hang it somewhere pridefully in her own living room. Instead, she dried it. Then she walked to a bookshelf and took down a small, dark wooden box. It was old, with a tarnished brass clasp and a small keyhole. It was not a jewelry box. It looked like a box meant for holding important papers. She opened it. The inside was lined with worn, black velvet. She placed the hummingbird inside, settling it carefully on the fabric. I felt a new, cold spike of panic. "Grandma, what are you doing? You're not putting it away, are you?" The thought of it being locked up, hidden again after I had just lost everything for it, was too much. Evelyn looked at me, her expression unreadable. She closed the lid. "Naomi," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Some things are too precious to be left out as targets. Some things must be kept safe, locked away, until the people who are worthy of them know what to do with them." She slid the box to the center of the table. "This," she said, tapping the lid, "is not just an ornament, it's a symbol." And Lydia was right about one thing, though she had no idea why. It does belong to this house, just not the one you're thinking of. I just stared at her, confused. "Grandma, I do not understand." Evelyn took a sip of her tea. "Greg is my son, and I love him, but he is a weak man. He was weak when your mother was sick, and he is weaker now. He lets that woman lead him because he is afraid of being alone, and he is terrified of confrontation." She leaned forward. "Lydia, on the other hand, is not weak. She is greedy. She has spent the last 8 years building her little empire, playing the queen of the Schneider house, managing the Schneider finances, making herself indispensable." She paused, and a small, hard smile touched the corner of her mouth. "She has built an entire kingdom on a foundation of sand. She just does not know it yet." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Naomi, that the house your father lives in, the house you grew up in, the house Lydia thinks is hers, does not belong to your father. It does not belong to Lydia. It never has." My mouth went dry. "Who does it belong to?" "It belongs to me," Evelyn said simply. "That one, and 2 other rental properties over on Elm Street. Your grandfather and I, we worked hard. We didn't spend. We invested. When he passed, it all came to me. Greg. Greg has been living there, rent-free. As a courtesy, he was always meant to inherit it. Yes, but he never has. The deed is in my name. The property taxes are paid by me, from a trust. Lydia has been managing your father's paycheck from the shop, but she has never, not once, touched the real assets. I could not process the information. It was too large. Lydia's power, her control, her ability to demote me to a servant in my father's house. It was all a performance. She was a guest, just like me. She was a long-term tenant who had started telling the landlord how to decorate. "She has no idea," I whispered, the shock of it hitting me. "None. She sees your father's name on the mailbox and assumes it's all his. She has never thought to question it. She is arrogant, and arrogant people are sloppy." Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was thin as paper, but her grip was strong. "I am not telling you this to plot some grand, dramatic revenge. Naomi, I do not believe in that. You do not burn down a house just to get rid of a few rats." Her eyes held mine. "I am telling you this so you can breathe. As long as you are in this house, under my roof, you are safe. No one will touch you again. No one will scream at you again. No one will lay a hand on you. As for fairness, life is long. It finds its own way to balance the books." She refilled my cup. "This is my offer. You will move in here, permanently. The guest room is already yours. You will continue to go to college. You will continue with your little design jobs. You will focus on building your own life, and you will let me handle Greg and Lydia. They will hear from me, and they will hear from my lawyer, but it will be on my terms, not theirs." I nodded, the relief so profound it made me dizzy. "Yes, okay. Thank you, Grandma." I hesitated. Why, why are you doing this? He's your son. You're choosing me over him." Evelyn looked away, toward the dark window. "Your mother, Claire, was a good woman. She was stronger than Greg ever was. She knew him. She saw his weakness, and she worried about you. I made her a promise, long ago, that I would not let you fall. Tonight, Lydia and Greg, they pushed you, but they also pushed me. And I am not a woman who likes to be pushed." She stood up, taking the wooden box. I watched as she walked to her small, private office, a little nook off the living room. She knelt, a slow, stiff movement for a woman her age, and turned the dial on a small, old-fashioned floor safe, hidden behind a stack of National Geographics. She placed the box inside. "Grandma," I asked, "the ornament? When will I get it back?" She closed the heavy metal door, a solid, definitive thunk echoing in the quiet house. She turned the handle, locking it. "You will open this later," she said, her back still to me. "When the time is right, and when you are ready to see everything that's inside." She stood up and looked at me, her face calm. "Go to bed. Naomi, you have school in the morning. Your new life starts now." I went to the guest room, a small, warm space that smelled like cedar and clean linen. I lay down, the ice pack still pressed to my face, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt no fear. I felt no invisibility. I just felt safe. Have you ever realized, in a moment of absolute crisis, that the oldest, quietest person in your family was the only one willing to swim upstream, against the current of their own blood, just to stand beside you? My new life began in the guest room of Evelyn's bungalow. I moved the few things I had, my textbooks, my hidden sketchbooks, the clothes I'd left with, into the small, clean space. I did not go back to the Schneider house. I did not ask for my other belongings. I simply ceased to be there. The silence from the other end of the street was absolute. My father did not call, not the next day, not the next week. Lydia, as I expected, acted as though I had evaporated. It was the culmination of her life's work. I was no longer a shadow in her house. I had become a ghost to the entire town. They had successfully and completely cut me off. But this new life was different. It was quiet, but it was not empty. Evelyn's presence was a steady, grounding force. She did not hover. She simply existed, a quiet promise of safety. I threw myself into my work. I was still enrolled at the community college, finishing my 2-year associate's degree. I was taking advanced drafting in a class on the history of textiles. During the day, I was a student. In the afternoons and on weekends, I was a fledgling designer, a one-woman operation hustling for any job I could get. I painted a new chalkboard menu for the Daily Grind coffee shop, using a swirling, Art Nouveau-inspired script. The owner, a stressed woman named Maria, loved it so much she paid me an extra $20 and offered me free coffee for a month. I took that momentum and went to the bakery down the street. I offered to redesign their window display for the spring. They had a collection of sad, faded pink plastic flowers. I replaced them with simple, tiered wooden crates, fresh moss, and a single, beautiful spotlight on their best-looking cake. They paid me $50. I was learning, in real time, how to turn my hobby into a trade. The biggest lessons, however, happened at Evelyn's kitchen table. She had agreed to help with the remainder of my college tuition, which was not a large sum, but it was more than I had. This help, I learned, was not a gift. It was an education. "You will not be like your father," she stated one evening. She pulled out a simple, black ledger book. "You will not be ignorant of your own money, and you will not, ever, be in a position where someone else can control you by controlling your finances." She made me write down everything: the $4 cost of a new drafting pencil, the $50 from the bakery, the $1.50 bus fare. Every Tuesday night, we would sit at that table and balance the ledger. She would circle my small extravagances, a magazine, a more expensive brand of ink, and just raise an eyebrow. I learned to justify my expenses. I learned to save, to plan, to see money not as something to be managed by someone else, but as a tool. It was the most important class I ever took. My first real break came from Maria at the coffee shop. "Naomi," she said one afternoon, wiping down the espresso machine. "My business is fine, but it's not good. People get their coffee and they leave. They never stay. Your menu is beautiful, but the room, it feels cold." "I know," I said, looking around. The lighting was terrible. A grid of harsh, fluorescent panels. The tables were scattered randomly. "It doesn't feel like a place you're allowed to stay." "Exactly," she said. "I have no money for a renovation, but can you do what you did for the bakery window? Can you just fix it?" I worked for 2 weeks, mostly after hours. I had almost no budget. I went to the hardware store and bought 3 cans of dark, warm gray paint. I convinced Maria to let me take down the fluorescent panels, replacing them with 9 simple, cheap pendant lights from a surplus store, hung low over the tables. I grouped the random tables into intentional zones: a long communal table for students, a few small 2-person tables tucked into corners for privacy, and 2 comfortable, worn armchairs I found at a thrift store for $10 apiece. I built a small wooden partition to hide the trash cans. I drew a huge, swirling hummingbird, my secret signature, in chalk on the wall behind the counter. I did not change the architecture, I just changed the feeling. 2 weeks later, Maria called me, crying. "Naomi, I do not know what you did," she said, her voice thick, "but I just had my best Saturday ever. People are staying. They're reading books," an older woman told me. She told me the place feels warm, like a hug. "How did you do that?" I stood in the back of the shop that afternoon and watched. People were clustered in the nooks I had created. The low, warm light made the dark paint feel cozy, not oppressive. I had taken a cold, sterile box and, with almost no money, I had made it feel like a home. I had made a space that told people, "You belong here. You can stay." It was the exact opposite of the house I had fled. It was the first time I understood that design was not decoration. It was a form of communication. When I told Evelyn about it, she just nodded. "Good," she said. "Now, you need a place to work." She cleared out the second bedroom, the one that had held her sewing machine and boxes of old photographs. "This is your studio," she said. "Do not let your work bleed into the kitchen. Give it its own space." I painted the walls a clean, bright white. I built a drafting table out of 2 filing cabinets and an old door, and I filled the walls. I pinned up my sketches, my textile samples, my paint chips, and in the center, on the largest, clearest wall, I tacked up a huge, charcoal and ink drawing of my mother's hummingbird. It was not a sad memory anymore. It was a blueprint. It was my logo. I took my camera, the old one my mother had owned, and started taking before and after photographs of my projects. The bakery window, the coffee shop. I built a simple, free website, a portfolio of 2. I posted it on a local community message board. My first email came from a town over, a woman opening a small yarn shop. "I saw what you did at the Daily Grind," she wrote. "Can you make my shop feel that cozy?" I took the job. Then another, a small real estate office, then a children's bookstore. Each small check, each thank you, each email from a stranger. It was like a tiny piece of my self-worth being glued back into place. I was not Naomi Schneider, the inconvenient ghost. I was Naomi Schneider, the designer. Maplewood is a small town. People talk. The story of the incident began to leak, as all secrets do. My grandmother did not spread it, but she did not hide me, either. People saw me at the grocery store, at the hardware store. They had seen the fading, yellowish-purple mark on my cheek in the days after. They saw me living with Evelyn. They saw my father's truck drive past her house, but never stop. Lydia's carefully constructed image of the perfect blended family began to tarnish. People were polite, of course, but the whispers followed her. "Did you hear? She hit Greg's daughter?" That poor girl. Claire's daughter. Threw her out over a Christmas ornament. Lydia's power in the town was built on a foundation of perceived moral superiority. That foundation was cracking. One evening, I was in my studio, sketching, when I heard a low murmur of voices from the front door. I recognized my father's. "I am just here to talk sense to my daughter. Mom," he was saying, his voice a frustrated, pleading rumble. "She is not here for you to talk sense to." Evelyn's voice was flat, cold as iron. "She is here for her own protection. This is a family matter. It's been blown all out of proportion. Lydia is... she's beside herself. This whole thing is tearing our family apart." I crept to my door, my heart pounding. I waited, praying he would say it. "I'm sorry. I messed up. Please come home." "A family?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "You cannot use that word in this house, Greg. Not until you are man enough to admit what happened. You stood there. You let that woman strike your child, a 19-year-old woman, in your own living room, and you said nothing." There was a long, terrible silence. I could picture him, standing on the porch, his face working, his hands clenching and unclenching. He was a man drowning, and the truth was the one anchor he refused to grab. "It was not like that," he finally muttered, his voice weak, defeated. "It was exactly like that," Evelyn said. "You made your choice. You chose that woman, and you chose silence. Naomi is making hers. Do not come back here, Greg, unless you are coming to tell the truth, to her and to yourself." I heard his heavy footsteps retreat down the walk, the sound of his truck door slamming, the engine roaring to life, then fading. I slid down the wall of my studio, my sketchbook in my lap. The pain was sharp, a fresh wound. He had not come for me. He had come to manage the problem. He had come to fix the family that Lydia was complaining about, not the daughter he had abandoned. But underneath the pain was something else, a strange, bright thread of relief. She had said it. My grandmother had said the truth out loud. "She struck your child. You said nothing." It was not a secret I was holding alone anymore. It was a fact, spoken and witnessed. My biggest project came the following year. It was from a man who owned a series of budget motels along the highway, one of which was in our county. The lobby was a wasteland of stained orange carpet, buzzing fluorescent lights, and 70s-era fake wood paneling. "My ratings are in the toilet," he told me, gesturing at the grim space. "People say it's creepy and dirty. It is not dirty. It is just old. I do not have money to gut it. What can you do?" This was my first real commercial contract. I was terrified, but I knew this feeling. I knew this space. It was a place of transit, a place of loneliness. "People who stop here are tired," I told him, my voice shaking less than I thought it would. "They do not want to feel like they are in a bus station. They want to feel like they have arrived somewhere safe, even for just 8 hours." I used the same principles as the coffee shop, but with a bigger, if still small, budget. I covered the wood paneling with huge, calming, large-scale prints of local forests. I replaced the carpet with durable, wood-look vinyl. I threw out the fluorescent lights and created pools of warm lamplight. I built a long, clean counter to serve as both a check-in desk and a simple breakfast bar. I designed for durability, but also for dignity. 3 months after I finished, the owner called me. His voice was shaking. "Naomi, my online bookings, they are up. I think it is nearly 20%. My reviews, they're good. People are mentioning the lobby. They are using the word welcoming. One of them said it felt like a boutique hotel." He paused. "I am sending you a bonus, and I want you to do the one in Centerville." I hung up the phone and walked to my studio. I looked at the check. It was for more money than I had ever seen. This was not a hobby. This was not playing with crayons. This was a tangible, economic value. I had not just decorated, I had measurably increased his business by 20%. I sat down at my drafting table and pulled out my textbooks. I started researching. I found the terms for what I had been doing by instinct. Experiential design, the psychology of space, spatial emotional response. I realized I was not just picking out paint colors and furniture. I was sculpting how a person felt inside a room. I was designing safety. I was designing belonging. I was, in my own way, learning how to redraw the very concept of home, and I was doing it all from a small room, with a charcoal drawing of a hummingbird watching my back. I was 23 when I made the leap. For 2 years. I had worked out of Evelyn's guest room, taking every small job I could find. The motel project had given me my first real capital, a small cushion of savings that felt like a fortune. It was enough. It had to be. Evelyn's bungalow was safe, but I was living in her shadow. To build my own life, I needed my own walls. I decided on a name first. Northwind Atelier. The North Wind. I thought, is the one that blows cold and hard. It's not gentle, but it's the one that clears the sky, that sweeps away all the dead leaves and the old, heavy air. It makes way for a new season. That was what I was doing. I was clearing the air. I found a small, 20 by 40 foot space in a city about an hour's drive from Maplewood. It was far enough to be anonymous, far enough that I would not be Greg Schneider's daughter or that girl Lydia had trouble with. I would just be me. The space was a former print shop on a forgotten side street, with high, dusty windows and a floor stained with a century of black ink. It was perfect. The deposit and first month's rent were steep. I had most of it, but not all. Evelyn drove with me to sign the lease. She did not just give me a check. She brought her own financial statements and co-signed as the guarantor. "This is an investment, Naomi," she said to me, her pen scratching across the paper. The landlord looking on with a new respect. "I am investing in your business. I expect a return. Do not make me a bad investment." I spent the first month not as a designer, but as a laborer. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing the ink from the concrete floor until my knuckles were raw. I rented scaffolding and painted the 20-foot-high walls a bright, luminous white, all by myself. I bought salvaged lumber and built my own shelves. I hung my own light fixtures, and on the front glass door, I spent my last $100 to have a sign painter apply my logo. A simple, geometric, stylized hummingbird, its wings sharp and clear. It was a secret I was telling the world. And then I sat at my new desk, in my beautiful, echoing white studio, and I waited. Nothing happened. The phone did not ring. The email inbox was empty. The bright, hopeful space I had built felt like a very expensive, very white tomb. Lydia's voice was a constant, looping recording in my head. Drawing pretty pictures won't pay the bills, a waste of money, a fantasy. This was the part of the story nobody talks about. The terror, the silence, the crushing weight of Evelyn's investment. I had a commercial lease. I had utility bills. I had 0 clients. I panicked. I took a job at a high-end furniture store in the city, working part-time, 3 days a week. I sold overpriced, beige linen sofas to people who did not even look at the price tags. It was humiliating. I was a business owner who was one missed paycheck away from failure, but it paid my studio rent. The other 4 days a week, I was at Northwind Atelier from 7 in the morning until well past midnight. I wrote proposals. I cold emailed real estate agents. I built a new website, using the professional photos I'd paid for of the motel lobby. I was working 2 jobs, one to survive and one to live. I was fueled by cheap coffee and a deep, simmering, cellular-level refusal to fail. The break came from a tiny, local architecture blog. The writer, a young woman who was as passionate as she was unknown, had stayed at the motel I redesigned. She had been so impressed by the lobby that she tracked me down. She came to my studio, sat on my $10 thrift store sofa, and I just talked. I did not tell her the dark parts. I did not mention Lydia, or my father, or the slap. I told her about the coffee shop and about the psychology of space. I told her about my mother and how I learned from a single, fragile glass ornament that one beautiful object, in the right light, could make a person feel like they belonged. The article she posted was small, but it was poetic. The title was, "The Studio Built by a Mother's Memory." It was not the New York Times, but the right person read it. My first call was from a young couple, both residents at the local hospital. They had just bought a sterile, new construction condo and had no idea what to do with it. "We saw the blog post," the woman said, her voice tired. "We have all this new furniture, but it feels like a hotel room. It doesn't feel like us." They were my people who had a life, but no home to put it in. I walked through their beige, boxy condo. They had a small, cardboard box in the corner of their living room. In it were a few framed college photos, a handful of running medals, and a faded poster from their first concert. "This," I told them, pointing to the box, "is the most important stuff you own. This is the starting point." They looked confused. I designed their entire living room, not around a new sofa, but around a series of custom, beautifully lit, built-in shelves. I created a memory corner, a place for the medals, the photos, the poster, a place for them. On the final day, I came over for the walkthrough. I stood by the door and watched them unpack that same cardboard box. I watched them hang the poster and arrange the photos on the new shelves. They were laughing, their arms around each other. They were, finally, home. I felt something click into place inside me. I was not just fixing their apartment. I was fixing something in myself. I was giving these strangers the very thing I had been denied. A home that saw them, that celebrated them, that made them feel like they belonged. The business began to grow. Word of mouth is a powerful thing in a city full of doctors and lawyers. The couple recommended me to another resident. That resident recommended me to a partner at her hospital. I started designing small, independent medical practices, therapists' offices, small law firms, and a lot of first apartments for people starting over. I had too much work. I hired an intern from the local design college. Then I hired a part-time junior designer, a woman named Sarah who was brilliant with drafting software. Suddenly, I was not just an artist. I was a boss. I was responsible for payroll. I had to get liability insurance. I had to negotiate contracts with difficult contractors. Every time I hit a wall, I called Evelyn. "This cabinet maker is trying to charge me 15% more than his initial quote." I'd say, pacing my studio floor. "Then you get on the phone," her voice, steady as always, "and you tell him his new bid is unacceptable and that you are already getting quotes from 2 of his competitors. Never be afraid to walk away from a bad deal. Naomi, they need you more than you need them." She was my secret weapon. The financial lessons at her kitchen table were now the backbone of my entire business. I was in Maplewood one Saturday, picking up Evelyn to take her to lunch. I ran into the hardware store to grab her some gardening soil, and I overheard them, 2 women, whose names I had long forgotten but whose faces were fixtures of my childhood, whispering by the paint swatches. "It is just awful, what I heard," one said, her voice low. "Greg Schneider is working double shifts. He looks like a ghost." The other woman leaned in, her voice full of grim satisfaction. "It is Lydia. That woman has run them straight into the ground. Credit cards maxed out, every one of them. And that daughter of hers, Tessa, in some expensive sorority, needing money every 5 minutes. I heard they might have to sell the house." I picked up the bag of soil. I turned and walked to the register. I felt a quiet, cold stillness. It was not joy. It was not pity. It was just validation, the universe balancing its own books. Lydia had built her kingdom on my father's paycheck, and that kingdom was crumbling because she had never bothered to learn its true size. They were simply living with the consequences of their own choices. I did not need to lift a finger. My biggest contract came that fall. The main hospital in the city, the one where my first clients worked, was renovating its oncology wing. They were accepting bids to redesign the family waiting room. I went into the pitch meeting. The other firms had slick, corporate portfolios, full of glass tables and steel chairs. I had my portfolio of cozy apartments, warm coffee shops, and the motel lobby. I did not tell them why I wanted this job so badly. I did not tell them about the beige rooms and antiseptic smell of my childhood. I just told them what I would do. "This is not a waiting room," I said to the panel of stern-looking administrators. "This is a room for fearing. It is a room for bad news. It is a room for grieving. And it is a room for praying. It cannot feel like an office. It cannot be beige. And it cannot be lit by fluorescent lights. It has to feel like a sanctuary." They hired me. I poured my entire soul into that room. I was designing it for my 8-year-old self, and for every family that would have to walk that path. I threw out the sterile, easy-to-clean vinyl chairs. I replaced them with custom, high-backed armchairs, upholstered in a soft, antimicrobial velvet. I designed them in clusters, creating small, private pods where a family could grieve without being watched by strangers. I used only warm, indirect lighting, all on dimmers. I built a living wall of real plants to filter the air and bring life into the space. I made sure there were charging outlets at every single seat. Remembering how my mother's phone was always dead, I designed a space for the one thing I remembered needing, a moment of dignity and quiet in the middle of a storm. The wing opened in October. A few weeks later, an independent regional magazine, Ohio Spaces, called me. They wanted to do a feature, a full 6-page spread. The writer, a sharp woman in her 40s, walked through the hospital room with me. She was quiet for a long time. "This feels spiritual, almost," she said, touching the leaf of a plant. "How did you know? How did you know what they would need?" I looked at the warm light reflecting on the wood floor. "I just designed what I would have needed," I said. The article came out, with beautiful professional photographs. The headline was, "The Healer of Spaces, How Northwind Atelier is Turning Old Wounds into New Sanctuaries." I framed a copy and hung it on the wall of my studio, right next to my charcoal drawing of the hummingbird. I still had not told the whole story to the press. I did not need to. The wound was private, but the healing was my business now. The call from the past came on a Tuesday night in late February. I was at Northwind Atelier, working late, my desk buried in fabric swatches for a new dental practice I was designing. It was almost 10 o'clock. My phone buzzed on the drafting table. I glanced at it, my heart leaping. The caller ID read, Grandma Evelyn. But it was not her. "Is this Naomi Schneider?" The voice was professional, hurried, female. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Sarah, a nurse at Maplewood General. I am calling from Evelyn Schneider's room. Your grandmother asked me to text you, but her hands... She is having trouble. She is here, Naomi. She was admitted this afternoon, and she is asking for you, the doctor. He said you should come. Soon." The floor dropped out from under me. I had seen her just last week for our Tuesday ledger meeting. She had seemed tired, yes, but no more than usual. The 80-year-old woman I knew was indestructible, a force of nature. I drove the hour back to Maplewood in a fog, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The smell of the hospital, that same sterile, chemical and bleach smell I associated with my mother's last days, hit me like a physical blow. I found her room in the cardiac wing. She was small, smaller than I had ever seen her. A tiny bird-like figure lost in the starched white sheets and blue thermal blankets. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, but her eyes, when they opened, were the same. They were sharp, clear, and absolutely furious at the betrayal of her own body. "Took you long enough," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I sat down, taking her hand. It was cold. "Grandma, why did you not call me? The nurse said you came in this afternoon." "Pah! Doctors!" she breathed. "A fuss over nothing. I'm fine." But she knew she was lying. We both did. She squeezed my hand, a surprising, wiry strength in her grip. "Listen to me," she commanded, her eyes locking onto mine. "There is not a lot of time for nonsense. I have arranged everything." "Arranged what? Your care? I can talk to the doctors. I can—" "No. Naomi, everything. The house, the accounts, the truth. I have spent the last few years making sure that when I am gone, they cannot change the story. They cannot turn black into white, and they cannot turn you back into a ghost. A cold dread mixed with my grief. What did you do, Grandma? I fixed it, she said, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. I kept my promise to Claire, and I kept my promise to you. Her eyes drifted shut for a moment, her breath catching. She inhaled sharply, her eyes snapping open again, focused. The box, she whispered, her voice urgent. The box? The wooden box? The one in the safe? Yes, the hummingbird. Do not let them get it. They will not. It's safe. You locked it? It's not about them getting it, she insisted, her voice gaining a strange, intense energy. It's about you opening it. Not yet. Do not open it. When? I asked, bewildered. Grandma, it's my mother's. It's mine. Not yet, she repeated. There will be a time and a place. You will know it when it happens, not before. Do you promise me, Naomi? I promise, I said, though I did not understand. Good, she sighed, and for the first time, she looked truly tired. She looked like an old woman at the end of a very long fight. They cannot hurt you anymore. Know me. You built your own walls. I just made sure the foundation was solid. She faded after that. I sat with her all night, holding her hand, the heart monitor beeping out its steady, slowing rhythm. Grandma Evelyn passed away 2 weeks later. She had rallied, been moved to a hospice facility, and then, as she would have wanted, she simply decided she was done. The funeral was held on a cold, bright March morning. The small church in Maplewood was packed. It turned out that Evelyn Schneider, in her quiet, steady way, had been the financial and emotional backbone for half the town. She had co-signed for business loans, paid for school books, and given advice that had saved at least 3 marriages, according to the eulogies. I stood in the back row, my face numb. I watched my father, Greg, and my stepmother, Lydia, in the front pew. They were performing the role of the grieving son and daughter-in-law with an awful theatrical perfection. Lydia, in a chic, expensive black dress, dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father looked genuinely lost. A large, confused man who had just lost his last true anchor and seemed to be only just realizing it. Tessa, now a young woman of 20, sat beside them, looking bored and scrolling through her phone when she thought no one was watching. At the small reception in the church basement, Lydia glided through the crowd, accepting condolences, her voice a perfectly modulated murmur of "thank you." She was such a force, and "we are just devastated." She was already absorbing Evelyn's social capital, positioning herself as the new matriarch of the Schneider family. She saw me standing alone by the table of sandwiches. She approached, her smile a tight, sympathetic mask. "Naomi," she said, as if greeting a distant cousin. "So good of you to come. I know how difficult things were. I am glad you are here. For your grandmother's sake. She always did have a soft spot for you, even with your choices." "I am here because I loved her. Lydia," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the anger she was clearly hoping to provoke. "Yes, well, we all did," she said, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "Family is what matters at a time like this. I just hope Evelyn realized that in the end, that blood is what matters." She patted my arm, a gesture of dismissal, and moved on. I stood there, surrounded by people who had loved her, and felt completely alone. I was the only one in the room who knew the truth of her last years. I was the one who had sat with her, balancing the ledgers. I was the one who had held her hand while she died. And this woman, this performative vulture, was claiming the narrative. The invitation came a week later. It was a thick cream-colored envelope, delivered by certified mail to my studio. It was from a law firm I did not recognize. Wallace, Pitt, and Rowe. It was a formal summons to the offices for the reading of the last will and testament of Evelyn Schneider. My name was at the top of the list of attendees, followed by Greg Schneider, Lydia Schneider, and Tessa. The air in my studio suddenly felt too thin. This was it. This was what she had been talking about. I have arranged everything. The day of the reading, I felt a strange, cold calm. I got an email that morning from Metropolitan Home, one of the biggest design magazines in the country. They had seen the Ohio Spaces feature on the hospital wing. They wanted to do a national feature on Northwind Atelier. "We are fascinated by this concept of designing for dignity," the editor wrote. "We would love to do an interview and a full photo spread for our fall issue." I looked at the email. 3 years ago, I would have cried. I would have printed it out and framed it. Now, I just typed a reply. I thanked them, said I was honored, and asked if we could schedule the preliminary interview for 2 weeks from now, citing a pressing family matter that needed my full attention. I hit send. I drove to Maplewood, not to Evelyn's house, not to my father's house. I drove to a red brick building on Main Street, the kind of old, solid building that held banks and law offices. I was the first one there. The receptionist pointed me to a conference room. I sat down at a long, polished mahogany table. I placed my keys on the table in front of me. The little brass tag for my studio was heavy and cool in my hand. I have my own walls. I reminded myself, I am not a guest here. Whatever happens in this room, I have a home to go back to. Then they arrived. My father came in first, looking rumpled and nervous. He saw me and just nodded, his eyes skittering away, unable to meet mine. He sat at the far end of the table. Lydia and Tessa came in together. Lydia was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit, carrying a designer briefcase. She looked like she was here for a hostile takeover, not a reading of a will. Tessa, beside her, looked like a sulky teenager, annoyed at being dragged away from her real life. Lydia saw me, and her eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. She clearly had not expected me to be included. She sat directly across from me, placing her briefcase on the table with a proprietary thud. "Naomi," she said, her voice carrying that false, sugary warmth. "What a surprise. I did not realize you would be involved in this." "The lawyer invited me, Lydia." "Well, of course," she said, adjusting her cuffs. "Evelyn was always so sentimental. I am sure she left you a little something, a keepsake. That's lovely." She leaned over to my father, her voice dropping to a stage whisper I was clearly meant to hear. "Greg, I just hope your mother was clear-headed at the end. I hope everything is split fairly, you know? For the family, for Tessa's future." My father just grunted, staring at his hands. He was a passenger in his own life. They still had no idea, after all these years, after the articles, after the growth of my business. They still looked at me and saw the 19-year-old girl they had cast out. They saw Naomi's little hobby. They saw the girl who played with crayons. They had no concept of the woman I had become, the business I had built, or the power I now held. They had not been paying attention. But Evelyn had. A man in a pinstripe suit, Mr. Wallace, walked in, carrying a single, thick file. He closed the door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place was like a vault being sealed. "Good morning," he said, sitting at the head of the table. "We are here today for the reading of the will of Evelyn Schneider. I was her attorney, and I am the executor of her estate." Lydia smiled, her "let's get this over with" smile. I just sat there, my hand on my keys, my back straight. I looked at the red brick building across the street. I was terrified, but I was also, for the first time, ready. Do you have the courage to walk into a room like that? A room where a dead woman is about to speak the entire truth of your family, right in front of the very people who spent a decade trying to silence you. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat. He opened the thick file, and the simple sound of paper moving seemed unnaturally loud in the small, tense room. "As I said," he began, his voice dry and formal, "I am the executor. The will is straightforward. Mrs. Schneider was a very organized woman." Lydia gave a tight, assenting smile. "Let's get on with it." Her posture screamed. My father sank lower in his chair, as if trying to physically shrink. Tessa was already looking at her lap, no doubt at her phone, her boredom a palpable insult. I kept my gaze on the window, on the bricks of the building opposite. "We will begin," Mr. Wallace said, "with the minor bequests." He read a list of names. To Mrs. Gable at the library, he left a sum of $500 for the children's reading program. To Mr. Henderson at the hardware store, he left $1,000 to be used for a vacation, because he has not taken one since 1992. He read 3 more names, each a pillar of the Maplewood community, each receiving a small, specific, and deeply personal gift. I saw Lydia's perfectly manicured fingers begin to tap a silent rhythm on her briefcase. This was, to her, a waste of time. These were the opening acts. She was waiting for the headliner. "That concludes the individual bequests," Mr. Wallace said, turning a page. "We now move to the primary estate." Lydia sat up straighter. Her smile became fixed. This was her moment. "The estate," the lawyer continued, "consists of 3 primary assets. First, the residential property at 1447 Maple Street, currently occupied by Mr. Greg Schneider." My father flinched at the sound of his name. "Second, the associated rental properties at 215 and 217 Elm Street. And third, the Evelyn Schneider investment portfolio, managed by Wells Fargo Advisors, with a current market value of—" He named a number that made me stop breathing. It was not a small amount of money. It was a life-changing amount of money. I saw Lydia's eyes widen, just slightly, a flicker of pure, naked greed. She thought she had hit the jackpot. She thought my father was now a wealthy man, and by extension, so was she. She looked at me, a quick, triumphant, pitying glance. "My world, little girl, you get a dusty keepsake. I get this." Mr. Wallace looked down at the document. He took a small, deliberate breath. "Per Mrs. Schneider's instructions, I will read this section verbatim. I, Evelyn Schneider, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all of my real estate holdings, including the properties at 1447 Maple Street, 215 Elm Street, and 217 Elm Street, as well as the entirety of the Evelyn Schneider investment portfolio, to my granddaughter, Naomi Claire Schneider." He looked up. The room did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. The air was sucked out of it. My father made a small, choking sound. His face, already pale, went a blotchy, purplish gray. Tessa, for the first time, looked up from her phone. Her jaw was literally hanging open, her eyes wide, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. She was seeing me, not Naomi, but a person who held power, a person who, she was just realizing, now owned her home. And Lydia, her face was a perfect, frozen mask of disbelief. The polite, strained smile was still there, but it had calcified. It was a rictus. Her skin was white, stretched taut over her cheekbones. She did not look at me. She did not look at my father. She stared at Mr. Wallace. "That," she said, her voice a low, dangerous quaver, "is a mistake. You must have read it wrong." "I did not, Mrs. Schneider," Mr. Wallace said calmly. "The language is unequivocal." "It's a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, her mask of composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. She slammed her hand on the mahogany table, making the water glasses jump. "That old woman was senile. She must have been. There is no way. Greg is her son." My father just sat there, mute, a victim of the explosion. "She manipulated her!" Lydia screamed, finally pointing a shaking finger at me. "She did! This little... She wormed her way in. She poisoned her against her own family. She has been planning this for years. It is elder abuse." I was as stunned as she was. I had expected something, a piece of the rentals, a college fund. I had not expected all of it. I had not expected the house I was thrown out of. I had not expected the foundation of my entire future to be handed to me in a single sentence. I heard Evelyn's voice in my head, from that first night at her kitchen table. I am only leaving it to the one person who knows how to protect what is hers. Mrs. Schneider? Mr. Wallace said, his voice cutting through Lydia's tirade. Evelyn anticipated this reaction. He turned to a small television and media player on a cart in the corner, a piece of technology I had not even noticed. She insisted on a video addendum, filmed in my office, 6 months ago, the day she finalized this will. He clicked a button on a remote. The screen flickered to life. And there was Grandma Evelyn. She was not in a hospital bed. She was in this very office, sitting in a chair, wearing her favorite blue knit cardigan. She looked thin, yes, but her eyes were as sharp and clear as a winter morning. She looked directly into the camera. She looked directly at us. "Hello, Greg," she said, her voice calm and strong in the silent room. "Hello, Lydia, Tessa, Naomi." Lydia let out a small, strangled sob. "I am recording this," Evelyn continued, her gaze unwavering, "so that there is no confusion. I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I own, and I know exactly who I am giving it to. I am giving my estate to my granddaughter, Naomi, for one reason, and one reason only. She is the only one who has earned it." Lydia made a gagging sound. "She did not earn it by manipulating me," Evelyn said, as if Lydia had spoken the word right to her. "She earned it by surviving. She earned it by building a life for herself out of the scraps this family threw her. She earned it by being the only one of us who had any courage." She then looked, it seemed, right at my father. Her face softened, but not with pity, with a profound, bottomless disappointment. "Greg," she said, "you are my son, but you made a choice, over and over and over. You made the choice to protect your own comfort instead of your own child. That night, years ago, that night, you let that woman strike your daughter for asking for the last piece of her dead mother, and you stood there. You chose to turn your back when your daughter needed you the most. I am not punishing you, Greg. I am simply ceasing to shield you. I have shielded you your entire life. I am now giving that shield to Naomi. She is the only one who knows what to do with it." My father put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking and silent, racking sobs. The full, undeniable, spoken-aloud truth of his cowardice had finally cornered him. Evelyn's gaze turned cold again, as if zeroing in on Lydia. "What I have built is not for you. Lydia, you did not build it. You did not earn it. You will not have it." The video clicked off. The screen went black. The silence in the room was heavier, more final, than any sound could ever be. Lydia was breathing hard. Her face mottled red and white. She was a cornered animal. She had lost everything. The house she lived in, the money she was counting on, the very status she had in the town, all of it, gone. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a pure, black, uncut hatred that was almost stunning in its intensity. She was searching for one last thing, one final piece of leverage, one tiny victory she could claim. And she found it. A slow, ugly smile spread across her face. "Fine," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Fine, you can have the house, you can have the money, but you will never have that ornament." I stared at her, confused. "That's right," she sneered, gaining confidence. "That stupid, ugly, glass bird, it is still in my house, on my shelf, the one I put it on, and I will see it shattered into a million pieces before I ever let you have it. That, at least, is mine to control." She leaned back in her chair, triumphant. It was the most pathetic, desperate power grab I had ever witnessed. She was clinging to the one, single thing she had ever won against me. Mr. Wallace did not sigh. He did not roll his eyes. He simply smiled, a small, polite, professional smile. "Ah, yes, the ornament," he said. He reached down to a drawer in the conference room's side credenza, a drawer I had not seen him open. He pulled out 2 items. The first was the small, dark, wooden box with the tarnished brass clasp. The second was a small, ornate brass key. He slid them across the polished mahogany table. They stopped, perfectly, right in front of me. Lydia's breath hitched. Her eyes were glued to the box. She knew. She understood. In that single, terrible moment, that she had never had any control at all, that the ornament had not been in her house for years, that her one, tiny but symbolic victory had been an illusion, a ghost she had been lording over. "Mrs. Schneider," Mr. Wallace said gently, "Evelyn retrieved the ornament herself the night she took Naomi from your home. It has been in my firm's bank vault ever since, per her instructions." He looked at me. "She left these for you, Naomi, privately. They are not part of the public will." He tapped the box. "She left a note with it. It just says, 'The one decoration they despised the most is the only one that truly mattered.'" Lydia made a sound like she had been punched. Her face was no longer red. It was a pale, sickly, greenish white. She had lost the war. She had lost the final battle, and she had just been shown, in front of everyone, that she had never even been a player in the game. Mr. Wallace looked at me again, his voice kind. "She was very specific. This box, and its contents, are for you to open, alone. She said, 'What is inside is a private conversation. It is between Naomi and the 2 women who protected her.'" I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood. I picked up the box. It was heavy. I picked up the key. I put them in my bag. I looked at my father, who was still weeping into his hands. I looked at Tessa, who was staring at me with a new, terrified respect. And I looked at Lydia. Her eyes were dead. I said nothing. I did not have to. Evelyn had said it all. I turned, and I walked out of the room. I walked out into the bright, cold March afternoon, the weight of the box in my bag a tangible thing. I stood on the sidewalk at the parking meter, my hand on the metal, just breathing. If you had been beaten down, silenced, and struck, all for daring to touch the one small thing that was yours, what would you do? What would you do when that very thing, and the whole secret story behind it, was finally and completely in your hands? I did not drive back to Evelyn's empty bungalow. I did not drive past the house on Maple Street. I drove the full hour back to my city, back to my street, back to Northwind Atelier. It was dark when I arrived. I let myself in, not turning on the main overhead lights. I walked through the shadows of my studio, the space I had built with my own hands, my own money, my own will. I walked to my desk, sat down in my chair, and clicked on the single, warm golden architect's lamp. It cast a small, bright pool of light on the dark wood. I took the box out of my bag. I set it in the center of that pool of light. I placed the small, cold brass key beside it. For a full minute, I just sat there. This was the place I had built my future, and in this box was the entire, unwritten truth of my past. I was finally, truly, safe enough to open it. I put the key in the lock. It was stiff, but it turned with a small, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with faded black velvet, just as I had seen Evelyn place it, and there, in the center, nestled on the worn fabric, was the hummingbird. It was perfect. The glass was clean. The iridescent blues and purples on its throat, catching the light of my single lamp. It was no longer a target. It was a jewel. But it was not alone. Beneath it, I saw what I had not seen that night at Evelyn's table. The velvet lining was a false bottom. I lifted the ornament out, my hand trembling slightly. It felt heavy, solid. I set it gently on my desk. Underneath the velvet, there were 2 thick vellum envelopes, yellowed with age, and a stack of old folded papers, tied with a simple piece of fabric, like a ribbon. My name was on the first envelope, written in a flowing, beautiful script I did not recognize. Naomi, it said. I opened it. The letter was dated 21 years ago. It was from my mother. My dearest Naomi, it began. If you are reading this, I am gone, and you are old enough to understand that the world is a complicated place. Old enough to understand that home is not always the place where people love you the right way. I had to stop, my vision blurring. I took a breath and continued. I love your father, but I know him. He is a good man, but he is not a strong one. He avoids the hard things, and after I'm gone, there will be so many hard things. I am so scared, my darling, that he will not be strong enough to protect you from the world or from himself. I am scared he will let my memory fade because it is too painful for him to hold. I have made a plan. Your grandmother. Evelyn and we have made a plan. I had a small savings account from before I was married. It was not much. But Evelyn, who is the smartest woman I have, the letter was blurred here, as if a drop of water had fallen on the ink. Evelyn has helped me move it. We have put it into a small trust, an investment. She will be the steward of it. It is not for Greg. It is not for the house. It is for you. Know me. It is your anchor, in case your father cannot be one, so that you will always have a piece of me, a piece of this family, that is yours and yours alone, that no one can ever take from you. My hands were shaking. I put the letter down and picked up the stack of papers tied with the ribbon. They were old bank statements, deed transfers, investment reports. I saw the initial deposit, a small sum from my mother, and then, year after year, I saw Evelyn's careful stewardship. I saw her use that money to buy the small rental properties on Elm Street. I saw her leverage those properties to pay the taxes on the main house. I saw the original deed to 1447 Maple Street, the house I grew up in. It had been bought, not by my father, but jointly by my grandparents, and the final payment had been made from the trust my mother started. It was not just an investment, it was everything. The house Lydia had lorded over, the land, the portfolio Mr. Wallace had read out, the seed of all of it, the true, legal, financial root, was not my father's. It was my mother's. It was mine. Evelyn had not just given me her estate. She had, at last, delivered my mother's estate. I sat back, stunned. The scale of their foresight, their quiet, 20-year conspiracy of protection was staggering. I picked up the second envelope. This one was in Evelyn's familiar, spiky handwriting. Naomi, to be read after the other one. I opened it. Naomi, it began, in her direct, no-nonsense way. By now, you understand the money, but you must understand the rest. That night I took you from that house. I did not just save you, I saved myself. I had sat for years, watching that woman dismantle your mother's life, and watching my son let her. I was honoring my promise to Claire. Yes, but I was also being a coward. I was hiding behind the scenes. That night, when she put her hands on you, she broke the dam. When I took that ornament from the wall, it was not just to protect the ornament, it was to free you, I knew. As long as that symbol of your mother was in that house, you would feel tethered to it. You would keep going back, trying to save a ghost. You would keep trying to earn your father's love, a thing he is too broken to give. So I took it. I took it to break the chain. The moment it left that wall, that house was no longer your mother's. It was just a building, owned by me, and occupied by them, and you were free. Now it is all yours. The house, the money, the rentals, the truth. You may be feeling angry. You may want to see them burn. You may want to do to them exactly what they did to you. Do not. If you want justice, Naomi, you do not have to be cruel. You just have to be correct. You do not need to do to them what they did to you. You just need to return everything to its rightful owner. The house is yours. The money is yours. Your story is yours. Take it all back. Do it calmly. Do it in the light. And then close the door. Their punishment will be living the rest of their lives with the truth they can no longer avoid. I love you, child. Be brave. E. I put the letter down on my desk, and I cried. I cried for the first time since she had died. I cried not for the money or the house. I cried because I had spent my entire life feeling like a ghost, an inconvenient, unloved leftover, and I had just learned that I had been, in fact, the most protected person in the room. I had been the subject of a secret, 2-decade-long plan, a fortress of love built by 2 women, my mother and my grandmother, to ensure I would survive the wreckage of my own family. The hummingbird ornament, sitting on my desk, glittered in the lamplight. It was not just a memento, it was a failsafe. It was the physical symbol of a secret inheritance, hidden in plain sight, despised by the one person who should have feared it most. I sat there for a long time, the letters in my hand, the ornament in front of me, and the grief, the shock, slowly receded, replaced by a cold, clear, absolute focus. Evelyn was right. I did not need to be cruel. I just needed to be correct. I would not be the victim in this story any longer. I would be the executor. I took out my phone. My first call was to Mr. Wallace. He picked up, his voice still professional, even at this late hour. "Naomi," he said, "are you all right?" "I am, Mr. Wallace. Thank you. I have read the letters. I am ready to proceed." "Very good. The transfer of the liquid assets will take a few days. The deeds will be filed tomorrow. As for the property at 1447 Maple Street, we will need to begin eviction proceedings for the current occupants." "No," I said. "Not yet. I want to do this face to face. I want you to arrange a meeting, not in your office, in that house. I want you to be there as my counsel. We are going to hold a family meeting to discuss the transition of the property and the future of the house." There was a pause. "That is an unusual request, Naomi, but it is your right. When?" "1 week from today," I said. "Next Tuesday, at 7 p.m., please inform them." My next call was to my junior designer, Sarah. "Sarah, I need you to clear my calendar for all of next week, all of it, and I need you to do some research. I need to know how to set up a charitable foundation." My third email was to the editor at Metropolitan Home. "Dear Ms. Davies," I wrote, "thank you again for your interest in Northwind Atelier. I have had a sudden development regarding my personal story, which I now feel is more relevant to my work than ever. I would be available for that interview next week. In fact, I would be insistent on it. I am planning a project that will be funded by my new foundation, and I would love to announce it, through you. The story, I believe, will be compelling. It starts with me, at 19, being kicked out of my family home, all because I asked to keep my mother's last ornament." I hit send. The pieces were moving. I would not just take the house, I would redefine it. I would use the assets my mother and grandmother had saved for me to create the Hummingbird Home Fund, a foundation to provide temporary housing, security deposits, and counseling for young people, just like me, who were being abused, controlled, or cast out by their families. Lydia and my father would not just be told to leave. They would be present for the announcement of what their former home was becoming. They would sit in that living room, and they would watch me transform the very asset they coveted into a sanctuary for people I was rescuing, from people just like them. I stood up and walked to the main wall of my studio, the one with my logo, the one where I pinned my most important projects. I took down the old charcoal sketch of the hummingbird. I picked up the real one. The glass was cool in my hand. I found a nail. I hung it, right in the center of the wall. The light from my desk lamp caught it, and it threw a small, perfect, iridescent blue reflection onto the white plaster. They had hung it on their wall as an unwanted piece of the past, a symbol of their victory over me. I would hang it, for this 1 week, as a symbol of my future. "This time," I whispered to the empty, quiet studio, "I am going to bring it back to that house. I will hang it in its rightful place, and then, right in front of them, I will be the one to take it down." I drove to Maple Street at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. Just as the sun was setting, I had the wooden box with the ornament on the passenger seat beside me. I pulled up to the curb. Not in the driveway. I was not a guest. I was not a daughter coming home. I was a landowner visiting a property. I walked up the same flagstone path I had walked 1,000 times. This time, however, I was not a 19-year-old girl hoping for scraps of affection. I was a 27-year-old woman, and I held the deed. Mr. Wallace was already there, his car parked in front of mine. He met me on the porch. "Are you ready, Naomi?" "I am," I said. Before I could lift my hand to knock, the door opened. Lydia stood there. Her face was a masterwork of forced, strained politeness. The last week had clearly been hell for her. She was pale under her makeup, and her eyes were puffy, but she was still performing. "Naomi, Mr. Wallace, please, come in." We stepped inside. My father was standing awkwardly by the staircase, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. Tessa was on the sofa, her knees drawn up, pointedly staring at her phone. She was trying to project boredom, but I could see her hands were shaking. She, unlike her mother, understood what was happening. The living room was just as I remembered it from my brief visit at Evelyn's funeral, only more so. It was crowded with new furniture, new lamps, framed photographs of Lydia. Greg and Tessa were everywhere. On the mantel, on the side tables, a gallery of a happy Schneider family that was a complete fabrication. And there, on the wall, between the two front windows, was the spot. Lydia had, at some point, tried to hang one of her new, generic floral paintings there, but the nail Evelyn had hammered in so long ago was gone, and the wall behind it was a small, pale, faded square. It was the only part of the room her relentless redecorating had never been able to touch. It was a ghost of a memory, a patch of paint that stubbornly remembered my mother. We all sat. Mr. Wallace and I took the two armchairs. Lydia, Greg, and Tessa sat opposite us on the sofa, a perfect, miserable portrait of a family on the brink. "Thank you for meeting with us," I began, my voice calm and steady. It did not even shake. "I know the reading of the will was a shock, and I am here tonight, as the new legal owner of this property, to discuss the transition." Lydia saw an opening. She leaned forward, her hands clasped, her face melting into a mask of tearful sincerity. "Naomi, thank you for that. I knew you would not be cruel. I knew that. Deep down, you understood that family is what matters. We, your father and I, we are so willing to put the past behind us. We can all start over. Forgiveness is what your grandmother, and your mother, would have wanted. She was good. She was so good. She was trying to frame this as a test of my character, painting me as the heartless, unforgiving child if I dared to deny her this fresh start. I did not take the bait. I did not argue. I simply reached into my bag and took out the wooden box. I set it on the coffee table in front of us. The room went absolutely silent. The only sound was the click of the brass clasp as I opened it. Lydia's eyes were glued to the box, her face pale. I lifted the hummingbird ornament from its velvet bed. I stood up. I walked to the faded square on the wall, to the spot where Evelyn's nail had been. The nail was gone, but the hole was still there. I had brought my own hook. I pushed it gently into the plaster. I hung the hummingbird in its rightful place. The late evening light from the window caught the glass. It shot a tiny, brilliant flash of iridescent blue and purple across the room, a spark in the heavy, tense air. Lydia looked like she was going to be sick. I turned back to them. "I was 19 years old," I said, my voice not rising, not breaking, just stating a fact. "I was standing right here, in this room. I asked my father if, when I moved out, I could please take this one ornament, the last thing I had of my mother's. I looked at Lydia. You told me no. You told me it belonged to this family. You told me I was ungrateful. And then you grabbed me. You shoved me into that cabinet, and you slapped me across the face." I looked at my father. And you stood right there, by the stairs, and you said, "Do not ruin Christmas." You let her do it. I looked back at the ornament. Grandma Evelyn walked in. She saw the truth. She took this ornament off the wall, and she took me out of this house, and I never, ever came back. The room was a tomb. My father was openly weeping now, his face in his hands. Lydia was white, rigid, her mask of sincerity gone, replaced by the cornered, hateful expression I had seen in the lawyer's office. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat. As Naomi stated, she is the full legal owner of this property. Free and clear, the deeds have been filed. Furthermore, he said, opening his briefcase, the financial documents in Mrs. Evelyn Schneider's private papers show, conclusively, that the original seed money for all the Schneider assets, including the trust that paid the mortgage and taxes on this very house, originated from a private trust established by Naomi's mother, Claire Schneider. This house, it was, in essence, always Naomi's. My father's head snapped up. He stared at the lawyer, and then at me, his eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. He was finally understanding. The family assets he had so generously allowed Lydia to manage had never been his. The very ground he was sitting on had been paid for by the wife he had erased, for the daughter he had abandoned. Lydia finally broke. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "After all I did, I raised you, I cooked your meals, I washed your clothes, I gave you a home for 10 years. I did not stand. I just looked up at her, my voice quiet, cutting through her hysteria. "Did you raise me, Lydia? Or did you use me as a trash can for every resentment you had? For your jealousy of a dead woman you could never compete with? For your own insecurities? You did not give me a home. You made me a servant in my own mother's house." She had no answer. She just stood there, her mouth open, her chest heaving. I had taken her last, best argument and shown it for what it was. "Now," I said, "this is what is going to happen. I was in control, in my studio, in my business, and now, here. You are not being thrown out on the street. I am not you." I looked at all three of them. "You have 6 months. You will live here, rent-free, for 6 months. Use that time to get your finances in order. Find a new place to live. At the end of that 6 months, you will vacate the property." "And then what?" my father whispered, his voice broken. You'll sell it? Just like that?" "No," I said. "I'm not selling it. This house has held too much pain. I am going to gut it. I am going to renovate it, from the studs up, and I'm going to give it away." I let that hang in the air. "This property," I continued, "will become the first Hummingbird home. It will be the headquarters for the Hummingbird Home Fund, a foundation I'm establishing with the assets my mother and grandmother left me. It will be a transition house, a temporary safe sanctuary for young people in this county who are escaping abusive families, a place for kids who get kicked out, or who are being mentally, emotionally, or physically abused, just like I was." Lydia actually stumbled back and sat down on the sofa, her face ashen. This was worse than selling it. This was an indictment. This was me, taking the very space of her power and turning it into a monument of her failure. "You are destroying this family," she whispered, tears of pure, impotent rage in her eyes. "You are destroying the Schneider name." "The Schneider family was destroyed the night you hit me and my father let you," I said softly. "I am just building something useful from the pieces." As if on cue, a phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. It was Tessa. Her head was bent, and she was staring at her screen, her face completely, totally white. "What?" Lydia snapped at her. "What is it?" Tessa looked up, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear, a social fear. It's online," she stammered. "An article. Mom, it's everywhere." She turned the phone around. The Metropolitan Home article had just gone live. The headline was massive, right under a beautiful professional photo of me standing in my studio, the hospital waiting room behind me. "From an ornament to an empire. How designer Naomi Schneider is redefining the meaning of home. And the subheadline, the founder of Northwind Atelier speaks for the first time about being kicked out of her family home at 19 and her new foundation, the Hummingbird Home, built for survivors just like her. Greg saw the headline. He looked at the phone, then at me. He was not just seeing his daughter, he was seeing a person the world saw, a person of value, of strength, a person who had been telling the truth all along. "Know me," he choked out, his voice thick. "Know me. I am so... I did not... I am..." He could not finish. He just fell apart. I stood up. I walked over to him, but I did not touch him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, simple business card. I had designed it myself. It just had the logo of the stylized hummingbird and the new website address. I placed it on the coffee table in front of him. "You have a right to your choices, Dad," I said, my voice not angry, just tired. "And I have a right to mine." He looked at the card, confused. "The Hummingbird Home will need volunteers," I said. "It will need people to fix things, to paint walls, to help. If you ever want to actually help a kid who is standing on the outside, a kid who has been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect them, you know where to find us. Maybe you can be the father to them that you were never, ever able to be for me." I left him with that choice. I left him with the first step of a redemption he would have to walk alone. Then, I turned back to the wall. I reached up. This time, there was no fight. There was no anger. There was no desperation. I calmly unhooked the hummingbird ornament. I cupped it in my hand. I looked at Lydia, who was staring at it, her face a ruin. "This never belonged to this wall," I said, my voice final. "It never belonged to this house. It belonged to someone who valued it." I turned, and I walked out the front door. I did not look back. I have it. Now, it hangs in my studio, in Northwind Atelier, right behind my desk, where I sign my contracts. Underneath it, I had a small brass plaque engraved. It does not say my mother's name. It does not say my grandmother's name. It just says, "Home is where you are seen." In the little video we just posted for the foundation, I told this story, the real one. I held up the ornament to the camera, and I asked, "What city are you listening from tonight? And what hummingbird in your own life? What piece of your past, your dignity, your truth, do you need to take back from the people who told you it was worthless?" I am leaving the studio now. It is late, the sun is setting, and that last bit of light is streaming through my office window. It is hitting the glass, and that little bird, after all these years, is finally and absolutely flying free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories and like this video, and you can support us even more by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by everyone who needs it.